Welcome back everybody to Keenan K TV. In today's video, I want to talk about why Robert Whittaker could defeat Israel the last Stylebender Adesanya. I have already made a video where I talked about Israel Adesanya defeating Whittaker, so be sure to check out that with the card that will pop up right now, or you can check it out with the link in the description. And with that being said, let's jump right into the video. This is a fairly difficult fight to break down in favor for either fighter. There are subtle nuances that each fighter can really go in there and execute certain techniques that the opponent is not really all that good in defending against. You see, against Robert Whittaker, somebody like Adesanya who can go in there, use his height and reach, establish range, and feint him, I'm fairly certain that that will be something problematic for him. However, on the other hand, when you take a look at something that he can do that Adesanya cannot really deal well against, is the fact that Robert Whittaker, he's a very fast fighter. He can cover a great deal of distance with a lot of explosiveness, a lot of power. So in the case that Robert Whittaker may go ahead and explode onto Israel Adesanya, whether the first initial way of defending against that attack that will come from Robert Whittaker, assuming that is the perfect instinct that Israel Adesanya will follow to defend himself. Let's say Robert Whittaker lunges in with a big left hook. He misses it. But the thing about Robert Whittaker is he's very good at chaining up the combinations. And let's just assume that he can go in there and miss his left hook. That's no problem. He can still follow it up. And assuming that he can go in there and he can land the first initial left hook as he usually does when he's lunging in, the follow-up shots are going to be even more devastating. We have seen against Kelvin Gastelum, who was a little bit shorter than Robert Whittaker, a little bit less rangier, and he was very successful in coming in, slipping to the outside, and then going in there and getting in range and getting off his own shots. Given the fact that Kelvin Gastelum is a southpaw fighter, him slipping to the outside and taking the outside on Israel Adesanya is going to be something that will obviously happen against a southpaw versus orthodox fighter. So for Robert Whittaker, he's not necessarily going to have that certain advantage unless Adesanya will go in there and start switching stances. He's pretty good at switching stances. Whether that will be an advantage against Robert Whittaker or a disadvantage given a certain circumstances that he can put himself in, we will have to wait and see come fight night. But only I would really just have to assume, logically speaking, that as soon as Israel Adesanya may switch over to the southpaw stance, the left hook that Robert Whittaker likes to throw, you would assume just because he can get to the outside a little bit better, you can only assume that he can, for example, slip to the outside and then bounce back in with a lunging left hook. He could do that, or that may exactly hinder Robert Whittaker from executing that exact move, because Adesanya, with all that consistent head movement, feints, hip feints, kicking feints, everything that you can name that is a feint, Adesanya will probably do in that fight. So maybe that can make Robert Whittaker gun shy from throwing that left hook against a southpaw Adesanya. But like I said, those are just only speculations that we will only have an answer to come fight night. One thing that we cannot really understate is how strong Robert Whittaker actually is. Even though that in his last two fights against yoel Romero, he hasn't been able to knock him out, that doesn't take away from the fighter and the abilities that he has to go in there and knock the opponent out. Truly, if you take a look at, for example, Derek Brunson or his fight against Jacare Souza, in these fights we clearly saw what type of a physical strength Robert Whittaker carries inside that octagon. And unlike Kelvin Gastelum, who has a terrific left hand straight, I truly don't believe that when you take a look at his other skill sets, his other tools, he doesn't really carry the same amount of power or consistency with those other attacks. Robert Whittaker, he does, and that makes him a very difficult fighter, especially if he can go in there and fight the way he always likes to fight. Whittaker can go in there and fight the distance fight against Adesanya. He may not be successful many times, but I do believe that he can have great openings in that matchup as well. He has shown that he can have great leg kicks, great teep kicks to the body, and these are all tools that he can use against Adesanya. Whereas if you take a look at Adesanya going in there against Kelvin Gastelum, it was really just Kelvin slipping to the outside or inside to go in there and land his left hand shot. And essentially, as soon as Kelvin Gastelum got figured out by his left hand from Adesanya's side, it was virtually a wrap in success for Kelvin Gastelum. Yes, he did have a lot more success later down in the fight, but as soon as Adesanya figured out his patterns, it was virtually something that he can go in there and control. But against Robert Whittaker, the arsenal that is present for him to go in there and attack and lunge in on Israel Adesanya, that is going to be something that I believe is going to be the biggest difference in this matchup compared to the last one. Now, if we take a look at Robert Whittaker, physically speaking, the guy is as tough as they will come. going in there and fighting Yoel Romero twice and not getting knocked out, even though he got dropped and arguably hurt pretty badly, he was still in the fight and he was still miles away from actually really being finished. Against Yoel Romero, yes, he did get dropped, but I think that at that point when he did get dropped, Yoel Romero, he was just lacking that little bit of energy to go in there and finish the fight completely. So in that regard, he has a great way of surviving even when he gets dropped and even when he gets hurt. So for Adesanya to go in there and fight him, especially in this 5-rounder fight, I highly doubt that he can go in there and make it a quick night. Yes, maybe he can go in there and land a knee right on the button, followed up with an elbow, high kick, whatever it may be. It can be a short night. This is fighting after all. But logically speaking, looking at the past fights, I highly doubt that we will get anything to that extent. So with that being said, given the fact that this can go all 5 rounds, if it depends on Adesanya's side obviously, because I honestly believe that out of the 2 fighters, it is really only Whittaker that can have a finishing chance in this matchup. Just the physical power that he carries, the speed, the explosiveness, the arsenal that he can present offensively, that is obviously, because defensively, if Adesanya can establish offense and make Robert Whittaker back up and make him only be defensive, that is going to be something that in my opinion will take Robert Whittaker out of his own game, out of his own element, and then we will see Israel Adesanya shine. But assuming that this is going to be another performance where Adesanya fights pretty much so consistent in comparison with all of his previous fights, I would have to assume that Adesanya will take the outside and stay at a pretty medium to long range, which means obviously to stay on the outside and close to the cage essentially. So in other words, he will be welcoming Robert Whittaker to go in there and be somewhat of the guy that will stand in the middle of the octagon and quote unquote be the ring general, because against Adesanya, you're not really, most of the time at least, the ring general against him, because he's just that smart, he's just that lanky, he just knows how to make you come in on him whenever he wants you to. Like, he will give you baits and you will take him and then he will counter you. Pretty smart fighter. But that is exactly one thing that Robert Whittaker is also. He's also a very smart fighter. And what does really brain smarts have to do with this matchup? Well, obviously, if you take a look at Kelvin versus Adesanya, you had offense versus defense, essentially. In this matchup, Robert Whittaker can do both of it. He cannot really go in there and fight on the front foot consistently. He doesn't really have to do that. He can explode into range whenever he wants to, because he's just that fast and he can cover the distance. So he doesn't need to be very persistent and consistent and always coming forward, always trying to get on to the outside, because that's something that Kelvin had to do. Robert Whittaker doesn't have to do that. And that is something that is going to be a bigger puzzle for Adesanya to solve, because there are more tools. He's not going to be in his face all the time. He's not really going to be coming at him consistently. And I believe that he's just going to have a lot more variety in just his approach to this fight that Adesanya will have to take into consideration. One thing about Adesanya that is pretty interesting that I've seen lately is that, yes, he's obviously a very skilled striker, but at the same time, he's also a fighter that tends to lean towards a certain way of fighting, and that is a long-range fighting style that kind of prefers a defensive approach first than an offensive one. And because of that, he's not really going to be the guy that will really just go in there and be the ring general or make the opponent feel like they're just in there with an opponent that can go in there and knock him out. So against Adesanya, because he's defensive, which is obviously the right thing to do given his frame, range, height, reach, whatever, that is obviously the most logical thing to do. But obviously at the same time, there's only so much outside fighting you can do. There's only so much defensive fighting that you can do before it all gets repetitive in a 5-round fight, especially against somebody like Whittaker who has no problems going all 5 rounds. And in those moments where, let's say, Robert Whittaker is able to figure out Adesanya, figure out that he tends to feint first and then attack and stay on the outside, or he tends to just stand parallel with his feet and then just move his head and then dodge to the outside, step away, get out of the danger zone. So given the fact that Whittaker is a pretty smart fighter, given the fact that he can go all 5 rounds, given the fact that he's a pretty fast and powerful fighter who is also very well rounded in MMA, this is obviously going to be a very tough fight for Adesanya. So in the end, I would have to say that looking at it objectively in the 5-round fight where Adesanya won't be really knocking out Whittaker, which is only my assumption, he can go in there and knock him out obviously, but I would have to assume and really expect Adesanya to not really knock him out, because he's not a really powerful puncher. We saw it against Anderson Silva. He was not able to really hurt Anderson Silva, knock him out, knock him down. Against Kelvin Gastelum, he really got him at a point where Kelvin Gastelum got really gassed out, and Kelvin really has about 2.5 rounds in him before he starts slowing down against a fighter, I should say, that is a pretty fast-paced and high-output fighter. In those matchups, he tends to slow it down like he did against Chris Weidman. But ultimately, these are all only speculations and assumptions, and theories on what could happen come fight night. But as I always like to say, in the end, only time will tell what will happen. For now, this was why Robert Whittaker could defeat Israel Adesanya. If you guys liked what you saw in this video, then be sure to drop a like on it, and also subscribe if you are new. As always, I have been Keenan from Keenan KTV, signing off. Later.